The rain in Silver Creek didn't wash things clean, it just pressed the secrets deeper into the mud. It was a Tuesday evening, the kind of darkness that settles at 4 p.m. and feels like a heavy wool blanket by 6. Inside the Sacred Breath studio, the air was thick with the smell of burning sage and damp coats. The windows were fogged over, turning the headlights of passing cars on Route 9 into ghostly, smeared halos of yellow and red. Elena Rossi sat at the front of the room, her legs folded into a perfect lotus position. She was 32, with hair the color of roasted coffee beans and eyes that always seemed to be looking at something just over your shoulder. She was beautiful, but in a fragile, porcelain way that made people want to protect her or break her. "Exhale the weak," Elena whispered, her voice a low melodic hum that seemed to vibrate off the hardwood floors. "Let the tension drip off your shoulders like water." 12 students lay in Savasana corpse, pose on their mats before her, and the room was lit only by candles flickering in the drafty air. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the old window panes of the converted barn. Elena's eyes were closed, but her brow twitched. She wasn't meditating. She was listening. Beyond the wind, beyond the rhythmic breathing of her students, there was a sound, and the crunch of gravel outside. A car engine idling low, a heavy, guttural thrum that she had heard 3 times this week. Her eyes snapped open. She looked toward the frosted glass of the front door, and a shadow blocked the weak porch light. It stood there, motionless, a silhouette darker than the night. "Namaste," she said, her voice cracking slightly. The class sat up, blinking in the dim light, oblivious to the shadow that had just vanished from the door. As they began to roll up their mats, purple, blue, teal, Elena's gaze remained fixed on the entrance. She moved to her own mat. It was a distinctive, custom-made deep crimson mat with gold embroidery on the edges. She rolled it tight, her knuckles white. She didn't know it yet, but it was the last time she would ever roll it. And the parking lot cleared out slowly. Headlights swept across the wet asphalt as the students drove away, leaving Elena alone to lock up. The isolation of the studio, set back from the main road by 100 yards of dense pine forest, usually felt peaceful. Tonight it felt like a cage. Elena dialed the rotary phone on the studio desk. The line clicked, hissed, and then went dead. "Damn it," she whispered. The storm must have knocked the lines out. She grabbed her gym bag and the crimson yoga mat. She threw on her trench coat, buttoning it to her chin. Stepping out the back door, she locked the deadbolt. The rain was torrential now, a freezing sheet of water that soaked her instantly. She ran toward her Honda Civic parked under the lone street lamp. She fumbled for her keys, dropping them into a puddle. A clink, clink. As she bent down to retrieve them, she saw it. A pair of boots, standing on the other side of her car. Muddy, black work boots. Elena froze, the rain plastering her hair to her face. She slowly looked up. The figure was obscured by the glare of the street lamp behind them, creating a halo of light that hid their face in shadow. They wore a heavy rain slicker. "Can I help you?" Elena asked, her voice barely audible over the storm. The figure didn't speak. They just took a step forward, and then another. Then another. Elena scrambled, grabbing her keys and lunging for the driver's side door. She jammed the key in, but her hands were shaking too violently. The figure was moving faster now, purposeful, heavy steps splashing through the water. She got the door open. She threw her bag inside. She turned to throw the mat in. A gloved hand slammed against the car door, preventing her from getting inside. Elena screamed, the sound swallowed instantly by a clap of thunder. She swung the heavy rolled yoga mat like a bat, striking the figure in the shoulder. It did nothing. The last thing seen in the cinematic frame is the crimson yoga mat dropping onto the wet asphalt, unrolling slightly in the rain, before a heavy boot steps on it and crushing the fabric into the mud. The drone shot pans over a landscape that has changed, yet stayed exactly the same. Silver Creek is larger now, with subdivisions cutting into the tree lines, but the area where the old barn stood is now an overgrown ruin. It's slated for demolition to make way for a new eco-resort. A yellow excavator claw ripped through the earth, tearing up roots that had held the soil for decades. "Hold it. Hold it." The foreman, a man named Miller with a face like weathered leather, waved his hard hat frantically at the operator. The machine groaned and halted, the claw hovering over a deep trench. Miller jumped down into the pit, his boots sinking into the wet clay. He wasn't looking at the roots. He was looking at something synthetic. Wrapped in a tangle of thick roots and buried under 3 feet of compressed earth was a cylinder. It was coated in 30 years of grime, molded and decaying, but the color was still visible in patches. Deep crimson. "Man, what is that?" a younger worker asked, peering over the edge. "Old carpet." Miller brushed away the dirt. The object was tightly bound with what looked like industrial zip ties, which had survived the rot better than the fabric. It was about 3 feet long. "It's a yoga mat," Miller muttered, confused. Why the hell would someone bury a yoga mat? He pulled a utility knife from his belt. Told the sheriff, "Don't touch anything else." "For a mat?" "Just call them," Miller snapped. He knelt, bringing the blade to the zip ties. Snap. The first one gave way. Snap. These second. The pressure released. The mat didn't unroll naturally. It was stiff, fused together by time and moisture. Miller used the tip of his blade to pry the edge open. The smell hit him first, not just mold, but something sweeter, sharper, ancient. He peeled back the first layer of the crimson foam. Soil spilled out. And then something white and smooth gleamed in the dappled sunlight filtering through the trees. It wasn't a rock. It was the distinct, rounded head of a femur. The camera zooms in slow, agonizingly close to the bone nestled in the rotting red foam. Detective Sarah Vance was too young to remember the Rossi case, but in Silver Creek, legends didn't die, they just collected dust. She stared at the evidence board she had hastily assembled in the last 3 hours. On the left, a grainy 1994 photo of Elena Rossi, smiling, vibrant, wearing a leotard. On the right, a crime scene photo taken 2 hours ago. A muddy, skeletal femur and a tibia, encased in a rotting yoga mat. The door to the interrogation room opened. Sheriff Brody walked in. He looked tired. He had been a rookie in '94. "Is it her?" Brody asked, collapsing into a chair. "The lab is running DNA against the familial samples on file," Vance said, pacing the room. "But the mat matches the description. Custom crimson, gold trim. It's Elena." Brody rubbed his face. "We searched that property. We searched it with dogs, with grid lines. That mat wasn't there. It was buried under the foundation of the old shed behind the barn," Brody, Vance corrected. "The shed that was built 2 weeks after she disappeared. Someone put her there and poured concrete over it." Vance walked to the table where the evidence bags lay. "But that's not the weirdest part." "Weirdest part?" Brody looked up. "We found a leg bone rolled inside a yoga mat 30 years later." "What gets weirder?" And Vance picked up a sealed plastic bag. Inside was a small, laminated card. Black. It was dirty, but legible. "This fell out when the coroner unrolled the rest of the mat to retrieve the remains," Vance said. "It was tucked right against the bone." Brody squinted at the bag. It was a library card. "Elena's?" "No," Vance said, her voice dropping an octave. "It belongs to Michael Halloway." Brody went pale. The cinematic tension spikes. The ambient sound of the precinct drops away, leaving a high-pitched ringing tone. "Michael Halloway died in 1990, Brody whispered. 4 years before Elena disappeared. He was the mayor's son. Suicide. Jumped off the bridge." "Exactly," Vance said. "So how did a dead man's library card end up rolled inside a murder victim's grave 4 years later?" The camera filters shift back to the grainier, warmer tones of the 90s. "Elena was in her kitchen, chopping vegetables. The house was a smaller frame cabin in the woods. It was cozy, filled with books and plants. The phone rang. The phone rang. By night says oneself, what to, then, logration, Elena picked it up. Hello? Silence. Then a sound. Heavy breathing? No, it was rhythmic. Inhale. Exhale, like she taught in class. Who is this? Elena demanded. You have something that doesn't belong to you, a voice rasped. It was distorted, mechanical. Is this about the studio? Elena asked, her hand tightening on the receiver. I told the bank I'd have the payment by Friday. Not the money, Elena. The memory. Click. None to crick. Elena hung up, her hands trembling. She looked out the kitchen window into the dark woods. She saw nothing but her own reflection. She walked to her bookshelf. She pulled out a thick book on anatomy. She opened it. The center of the pages had been hollowed out. Inside lay a small cassette tape and a silver key. She stared at the items. I should have burned you, she whispered to the objects. She took the tape and the key and shoved them into her gym bag, the same bag she would take to the studio on Tuesday night. The fluorescent lights hummed. Dr. Aris, the medical examiner, stood over the stainless steel table. And the remains were sparse, just the femur, the tibia, and a few fragments of the foot. Vance stood behind the glass partition. Cause of death. Vance spoke into the intercom. Hard to tell from just a leg. Detective, Aris replied, his voice tinny through the speaker. But there are tool marks on the femur. Saw marks. No, Aris said, leaning in with a magnifying glass. Teeth marks, but not animal. Vance felt a chill crawl up her spine. Human. Indeterminate. But look at this. Aris pointed to the ankle bone. There is a wire wrapped around the tibia, a copper wire. It was used to bind the ankles together before decomposition. Vance's phone buzzed. It was a text from the tech team investigating the site where the mat was found. Text, we found the rest of the body, or what's left of it, 10 yards away. But detective, you need to get down here. The head is missing. Vance stared at the text. Dr. Aris, she said, did you check the marrow? Standard procedure. Why? Because I need to know if that leg actually belongs to Elena Rossi. Aris paused. We assumed. Don't assume, Vance snapped. She turned to leave but stopped as Aris called out. The detective. One more thing, the mat. I scraped the interior lining. And? I found trace amounts of glitter. Red stage quality glitter. Sawdust. Vance froze. Sawdust and stage glitter. There was only one place in Silver Creek that used that combination in 1994. The old puppet theater down by the river. At the place that had been condemned in 93. Vance didn't wait for backup. She drove her unmarked cruiser to the derelict structure of the Marionette Grand. The building was a rotting husk of Victorian architecture, tilting precariously toward the riverbank. She pulled her flashlight and service weapon. The beam cut through the dusty air, illuminating rows of broken velvet seats. Saw dust and glitter. She walked toward the stage. The floorboards groaned under her tactical boots. In the center of the stage, sitting on a single wooden stool, was a tape recorder, an old 90s model. Vance approached it slowly. Her heart hammered against her ribs. The device looked pristine, out of place amidst the ruin. There was a cassette tape inside. She reached out with a gloved hand and pressed play. The tape hissed. Then Elena Rossi's voice filled the empty theater, terrified and sobbing. Please, I told you I don't know where it is. I don't know where Michael hid it. Then, a different voice. The same distorted voice from the phone call in the flashback. And posture, Elena. Straighten your spine. If you want to survive, you must be flexible. A click, the tape ended. Vance shone her light further back on the stage. There, hanging from the rafters, were rows of strings, marionette strings. But attached to the bottom of the strings weren't wooden puppets. Vance gasped, the air rushing out of her lungs. Hanging from the strings, swaying slightly in the draft, was a human skeleton. It was missing its left leg. and in the place of the skull, someone had tied a purple yoga block with a smiley face drawn on it in lipstick. Vance raised her gun, spinning around as she heard the creak of the theater doors closing behind her. The sound of the heavy oak doors slamming shut echoed like a gunshot in the cavernous theater. Detective Sarah Vance didn't scream. She dropped to a crouch, her weapon trained on the darkness above the mezzanine. "Police," she shouted, her voice steady, though her pulse hammered against her throat. "Show yourself." Then, dust motes danced in the beam of her flashlight. The skeleton hanging from the rafters swayed mockingly, the purple yoga block head smiling down at her. Creake. Mansol. A footstep. Not from the doors, but from the wings of the stage. Vance killed her flashlight. Darkness swallowed the room instantly. She moved, sliding silently to the left, putting a heavy velvet curtain between her and her last known position. She needed to change the angle. She was in a fatal funnel. When the sound tore through the silence, the distinct whirr click of a pulley system. Suddenly a spotlight snapped on, blindingly bright, hitting center stage. It illuminated the hanging skeleton. And then the skeleton began to dance. Someone was operating the rigging. The bones clattered together, a grotesque xylophone as the arms jerked up and down. Vance squinted against the glare, spotting the movement in the catwalks 40 feet above. And a shadow. She raised her weapon. "Stop, or I will fire." The figure on the catwalk didn't stop. They slashed a knife through a rope, and a heavy sandbag used for counterweighting scenery plummeted from the darkness. It missed Vance by inches, smashing through the rotting stage floorboards with a deafening crash, sending a plume of splintered wood and ancient dust into the air. Vance didn't hesitate. She fired 2 shots toward the catwalk, warning shots into the metal grating. Sparks flew, and the shadow bolted. The sound of boots ringing on metal stairs echoed away from her, heading toward the roof access. Vance scrambled over the debris, rushing for the backstage exit. She kicked the door open, bursting into the cool night air of the alleyway. Silence. Nay, silence. The alley was empty, save for a feral cat darting under a dumpster. The fire escape ladder was sliding down, the rusty metal screeching, but whoever had used it was gone. Vance holstered her weapon, breathing hard. She looked down at her hands. They were covered in the dust from the stage. She brushed them off and saw something stuck to her sleeve, picked up from when she dove behind the curtain. It was a photograph. A Polaroid. She pulled it free and shone her penlight on it. The photo was old, the colors shifting to orange. It showed a living room, perfectly ordinary, except for one detail. Elena Rossi was in the photo. She was sitting on a floral sofa, staring blankly at the camera. She was wearing a dress that looked like it belonged in the 1950s, and around her neck was a collar. A thin leather dog collar. Written on the white border of the Polaroid in jagged black ink were 2 words. Act 2. Mew. Elena woke up to the smell of stale popcorn and mildew. Her head throbbed. The last thing she remembered was the rain, the figure, and the sickening crunch of her own yoga mat hitting the car door before everything went black. She opened her eyes. She wasn't in a cell. She was in a living room. A fireplace crackled with artificial logs, gas-powered, and a floral sofa. A heavy CRT television playing static. Elena tried to stand, but her legs seized. She looked down. Her left ankle was shackled to the heavy iron leg of the sofa with a long chain. It gave her about 10 feet of movement. "Hello?" she croaked. Her throat felt like it was filled with glass. She pulled at the chain. It held fast. She scanned the room. It felt wrong. The walls, they didn't reach the ceiling. Above the floral wallpaper there was darkness, and way up high industrial lights. She was on a set. Is anyone there? She screamed, panic rising in her chest like bile. From the darkness beyond the living room set, a voice emerged. It was amplified, coming from speakers overhead. "Scene 1, take 1, the distorted voice said. "The dutiful wife prepares dinner." Elena froze. "Who are you? What do you want?" Action. The voice roared, louder this time, vibrating the floorboards. A spotlight hit a small kitchenette to her right. On the counter lay a raw steak, a knife, and a bottle of red wine. "I'm not doing anything until you let me go," Elena yelled, grabbing a heavy vase from the side table and hurling it into the dark. It shattered against something hard concrete. Silence. "Monsieur, one." Then a low buzz. The chain around her ankle vibrated. Zap. Damn. Elena screamed as electricity coursed through the shackle. It wasn't lethal, but it was agonizing. She collapsed to the carpet, convulsing. "Cut," the voice said, devoid of emotion. "Let's try that again. The dutiful wife prepares dinner. If you do not play your role, Lena, the shock will be higher next time. And if you still refuse, I will start removing parts of you. We need you to be flexible." Elena, weeping, her body trembling from the aftershocks, crawled toward the kitchenette. She reached for the knife. "Let him." Ah, the voice chided. "Prop knife, retractable blade. Do not think you can rewrite the script." Elena picked up the plastic knife. She looked into the dark, tears streaming down her face. "What script?" she whispered. "The one Michael tried to ruin," the voice replied. The mood in the morgue was grim. Sheriff Brody stood in the corner, arms crossed, looking like he wanted to be anywhere else. Vance was leaning over a laptop, reviewing the theater schematics. Dr. Aris walked in, stripping off his latex gloves. "We have the DNA results," Aris said. He didn't look at Vance. He looked at the wall. "Is it Elena?" Brody asked. "Von Backgrundsted." "No," Aris said. Vance looked up. "Then who?" Aris walked to the monitor and pulled up a dental record comparison. "The leg found in the yoga mat and the skeleton found hanging in the theater, they are a match to each other," Aris explained. "The femur found in the mat completes the skeleton found on the stage." "Okay," Vance said, impatient. "So the killer dismembered the victim, buried the leg in Elena's mat, and hung the rest in the theater. Who is the victim?" "Mondo." Aris clicked a button. A name appeared on the screen. "Michael James Halloway. Dob. 04/12/1965. DOD official. 11/03/1990. The room went silent. The hum of the refrigerator unit seemed to get louder. That's impossible," Brody whispered. "I was there. I saw the body pulled from the river. It was bloated, sure, but the coroner identified him. We buried him." "Then you buried someone," Vance said, her mind racing. "But you didn't bury Michael Halloway." She walked to the whiteboard. She drew a line connecting Elena Rossi and Michael Halloway. "Michael disappears in 1990, ruled a suicide. 4 years later, Elena disappears," Vance muttered. Elena had Michael's library card hidden in her mat. And now we know she was literally carrying his leg bone. "Why?" Brody asked. "Why keep a leg bone?" "She didn't keep it," Vance said, a realization hitting her. "She was hiding it, or moving it." Vance turned to Brody. "You said Michael was the mayor's son, who identified the body in 1990. His father, Mayor Halloway, and his brother, Julian." "Julian," Vance repeated. "Where is Julian Halloway now?" Brody shifted uncomfortably. "He lives in the old estate up on the ridge. He's a recluse. Used to be a big-shot director in indie films before he had a breakdown in the late 90s. Vance grabbed her jacket. "A director," she said coldly. "Of course." Elena had lost track of time. The lights never turned off completely. They just dimmed to a deep blue night setting. She had played the role. She had cooked the fake dinner. She had rocked a plastic baby to sleep. She had read lines from a script that made no sense, dialogue about betrayal, about a stolen masterpiece. She was weak. She barely ate the meager rations pushed toward her on a sliding tray. But she was watching. She was learning the patterns. The captor, she called him, the director, never entered the light. But he had to sleep. Currently, the speakers were playing the sound of rain. It was a loop. Every 45 seconds there was a distinct thunderclap. Elena had found a loose screw on the underside of the sofa. For 3 days she had been working it back and forth against the metal shackle around her ankle. Scrape, scrape, thunder, scrape, scrape, thunder. She timed the noise to hide her work. The director's voice came over the speaker. It sounded slurred today. Drunk? Scene 7. The confession. Elena moved to the armchair. Elena didn't move. Elena. Mine. I'm sick, she rasped, lying on the floor. I can't move. Get up. The buzz of the electric shock came, but Elena was ready. She had wedged the rubber sole of her sneaker between the metal cuff and her skin. It still stung, but it didn't incapacitate her. But she feigned unconsciousness. A heavy sigh echoed from the darkness. Then the sound of a metal door opening. Footsteps. Real ones, not sound effects. The director was coming onto the stage. Elena lay perfectly still, her hand gripping the loose screw. It was sharp, jagged metal. It wasn't much, but it was all she had. The footsteps got closer. She smelled him before she saw him. Old Spice, whiskey and chemicals. And the pair of boots stopped right in front of her face. Wasted talent, the man whispered. He knelt down to check her pulse. Elena's eyes snapped open. She drove the jagged screw into the man's hand with every ounce of yoga-honed strength she possessed. He howled a raw, human sound. Elena scrambled up, ignoring the pain in her leg. She didn't run away, the chain wouldn't let her. She wrapped the chain around the man's neck before he could stand. She pulled. He thrashed, clawing at the chain. Where is the key? She screamed, tightening her grip. The key to the shackle. The man choked, his face turning purple in the blue stage light. He fumbled at his belt. He threw a small magnetic fob across the floor, out of reach. Elena cursed. She shoved the man away and dove for the fob. She grabbed it. Beep. The shackle clicked open. She was free. She ran into the darkness, past the cameras, past the lights. She found a heavy steel door. She pushed it open and stopped dead. She wasn't in a warehouse. She wasn't in a basement. She was in a glass box, suspended in the middle of a massive underground cavern. And staring back at her, from the other side of the glass, were rows and rows of mannequins, dressed like an audience. And in the front row, rotting in the seat, was a corpse with a missing leg. The Holloway estate looked like it had been drawn in charcoal and left out in the rain. The Gothic Revival mansion sat perched on a cliff overlooking the churning Pacific Ocean. Vance and Brody pulled up to the wrought iron gates. They were unlocked. I don't like this, Brody said, hand on his holster. He's expecting us, Vance said, or he doesn't care. They walked up the crumbling stone steps, and the front door was ajar. Inside, the house smelled of cedar and dust. Mr. Holloway? Vance called out. No answer. When? They moved through the hallway, guns drawn, and the walls were lined with movie posters. The Silent Scream, The Forgotten Take, The Puppet's Requiem, all directed by Julian Holloway, all flopped in the 90s. They entered the main library. It was a massive room, floor-to-ceiling books. Sitting in a high-backed leather chair, facing the fireplace, was a man. Julian? Brody said. The chair swiveled slowly. Julian Holloway was in his 60s now, gaunt, his hair wild and white. He wore a velvet smoking jacket that had seen better decades. He held a glass of brandy. When the critics arrive at last, Julian smiled. His teeth were yellow. What? Julian Holloway, Vance said, stepping forward. We need to ask you about your brother, and about Elena Rossi. Julian laughed. It was a dry, rattling sound. Elena, my star, my muse. She was difficult to work with, very resistant to direction. Where is she? Vance demanded. She walked off set, Julian said, swirling his brandy. 30 years ago. Just like Michael. Everyone leaves me. They all think they can write their own endings. We know about the skeleton, Julian Vance said, pressing him. We know Michael didn't commit suicide. We found his leg in Alina's mat. Julian's expression didn't change, but his grip on the glass tightened until his knuckles turned white. Michael, he spat. Michael was boring. He wanted to be a politician. He wanted to sell the land where my studio stood. He didn't understand art. So you killed him? I repurposed him, Julian corrected. I made him part of the set. But Elena, she stumbled onto it. She found the bone. She was snooping. She thought she could take evidence to the police. Where is the rest of her? Brody stepped in, his anger flaring. Julian looked at the grandfather clock in the corner. Tick-tock, Sheriff. The final reel is almost finished. He reached into his pocket. Vance tensed, finger on the trigger. Julian pulled out a remote control. He pointed it at the massive oil painting above the fireplace. He pressed a button, and the painting slid upwards with a mechanical hum. Behind it was a wall of monitors. 12 screens. Vance gasped. Most of the screens showed static or empty rooms in the old underground bunker. But the center screen showed a live feed. It was a small, earthen cell. A woman was curled in the corner. She was old now, her hair gray and matted, her clothes rags. But she was alive. She was rocking back and forth. And written on the dirt wall behind her in scratches were thousands of tally marks. She didn't escape, Julian whispered, a tear leaking from his eye. I never let her leave. We've been filming The Long Wait for 30 years. It's my masterpiece. Vance stared at the screen in horror. Elena Rossi was alive. Where is she? Vance screamed, grabbing Julian by the lapels. Julian smiled. Underground. But the air filtration system, it's tied to my heart rate monitor. He held up his left wrist. A smart watch blinked rapidly. If my heart stops, the fan stops, and she suffocates in 10 minutes. Julian pulled a small pistol from under the cushion of his chair and put it under his own chin. Cut to black, he whispered. The camera opens on extreme darkness. Slowly, a sliver of light bleeds in, revealing the texture of a dirt wall. It is covered in scratches, thousands of them. Elena Rossi, or the woman who used to be her, sat in the center of the glass cube. She was 52 years old now, though she looked 80. Her hair was a matted curtain of silver hanging to her waist. Her skin was translucent, pale as the cave fish that swam in the underground pools nearby. She wasn't moving. She was holding a pose, Vrixasana, tree pose. She had held it for hours. It was the only way to keep the madness at bay. If she focused on the balance, on the rooting of her foot into the cold concrete floor, she wasn't in a cage. She wasn't the star of a madman's home movie. She was a tree, and trees can outlast anything. Above her, the ventilation fan hummed a rhythmic, mechanical heartbeat that she had listened to for 30 years. Thrum, thrum, thrum. Suddenly the rhythm changed. The hum faltered. It sputtered, like an engine running out of gas. Then, with a metallic groan, the fan blades slowed. Stopped. Merc stopped. Silence. Absolute suffocating silence. Elena opened her eyes. She didn't panic. She looked up at the vent. She knew what this meant. The director had promised her this day would come. The curtain call, she thought. She exhaled, unspooled her limbs from the pose, and sat in the center of the floor. She closed her eyes. She began to count her breaths, knowing they were numbered. The sound was deafening in the library. Blood misted the oil painting of the Holloway ancestors. Julian Holloway slumped back in his leather chair, the pistol falling from his hand onto the Persian rug. No, Vance screamed, lunging forward. She pressed her fingers to his neck. Nothing. The damage was catastrophic. On Julian's wrist, the smart watch let out a high-pitched, continuous whine. B-E. B. On the wall of monitors, the red light on the ventilation system control panel flickered and died. The live feed of Elena in the cell remained, but the audio feed cut to static. "He's dead," Vance said, her voice shaking with rage. He killed himself to kill her. But Sheriff Brody was already on his radio. "Dispatch. We have shots fired at the Holloway estate. Suspect is down. We have a hostage situation, location unknown. I need a trace on a signal originating from this property now." Vance stared at the monitors. She scanned the feed of Elena. The woman in the cell wasn't panicking. She was meditating. "No." "Brody, look at the background," Vance said, pointing to a different screen 4. It showed a wider angle of the underground facility. It wasn't just a room. It was a cavern. The walls were wet, glistening black rock. And in the corner of the frame, there was a steady dripping of water into a pool. Sea caves, Brody realized. The Holloway estate is built on top of the obsidian sea caves. We used to play down there as kids before they sealed the entrances. Sealed them? Yeah, in the early 90s. Because of structural instability. Brody's face hardened. Julian sealed them to build his studio. Vance checked her watch. How long did he say? 10 minutes? If the air cuts, the CO2 build-up in a sealed glass box underground. Brody trailed off. "Where is the entrance?" Vance grabbed Julian's keys from the desk. "There's a service elevator in the cliffside folly. The old gazebo. Like 2, man. Move. Move."